Yep, it's
Good?
recording.
Okay. Welcome. Good morning. Good morning. This is installment number 2 of what was going down at the time of Jesus, right? What was first century Israel like? First, a couple of commercials. You'll notice the board up here. And we have Joe and Pat Kaiser to thank for this. This is somebody's, that's a good word, rendition of, here's Adam and Eve, and the genealogy, the family tree down to Jesus. Now, so there it is. Feel free, I'm not going to leave it up here, but feel free to take a look. It's pretty complete. I mean,
Who did that?
Pretty detailed. I don't know. You have to look at the bottom. I'm not sure who. Joe and Pat bought that and donated that. So there we are.
Okay.
Warning. It's hazardous to say this is exactly what it was. I mean, because genealogies in the Old Testament don't even agree with each other all the time. Okay. So just one little caveat. But it's interesting. Second commercial. This is our last session on first century Israel, but next month we will pick it up again with some of the non-canonical Gospels, the Gospels of Mary Magdalene and Judas and Thomas. Okay, so that will be August the 14th and the 21st, 9:30 a.m., 7 o'clock p.m. Then in September...
That's going to be here?
That will be here. Yeah, those will be here. In September, we will spend 3 weeks, September 4th, 11th, and 18th, talking about the prophet Isaiah.
Oh, yeah.
Those will be Wednesdays. Those will be in here. In October, we'll talk about, on 3 Wednesdays, we'll talk about 3 of the minor prophets. And then in November, we will talk about the prophetic role of the laity in the church. So it's all about the prophets this fall. One other background thing, I promised David Sullivan that I would bring this up. I promised I would answer the question that he asked last week. Who comprised the Roman legions that were in Israel during the time of Jesus? Simple little question, right? Not really. So this is what I was able to learn, that you had to be a Roman citizen, at least at this time, in order to be in the military. That at the time of Caesar Augustus, the guy who was the Caesar at the time that Jesus was born, there were 25 legions in the Roman army. That's all over the empire. That's not in Israel. There were 25 legions of 6,000 soldiers each, which, if I can do math, is about 150,000 soldiers. A legion was made up of 10 cohorts, and there were 540 soldiers in a cohort. So that would be about 5,400 soldiers in a legion. The 10th legion was actually stationed in Israel during the time of Jesus. But these were, I imagine you would call them the National Guard. They were auxiliary troops. Okay, they weren't the frontline guys. I don't know where they were, but they weren't in Israel. Okay? I hope that answers your question, sir, at least somewhat sufficiently.
It does. I didn't realize that the Roman only criteria was still in effect at that time.
The citizens only?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was. They had to loosen that up later on in order to win over the quote barbarian tribes. I put that in quotes because those are my ancestors. Okay, were recruited to serve in the army. Okay, if you can't beat them, join them, or have them join you. All right, so. We're going to talk about the idea, the concept of the reign of God or the kingdom of God in first century Israel. I think the notion of the reign of God or the kingdom of God is and where it came from, its background, is critical. I mean, absolutely critical to understanding the preaching and the ministry and the mission of Jesus. So the term reign of God or kingdom of God appears in the Gospels roughly 100 times. And that's in the Synoptics. John's Gospel does not have Jesus talking about the reign of God, and that's, I think, because by that time, the focus of Christianity shifted from Jesus is coming back any day now to, well, he's coming back sometime, but we don't know when. We'd better organize and institutionalize this movement. So, in my mind, and in the minds of many, the primary theme of Jesus' mission and message was the reign of God. The reign of God is in your midst. The kingdom of God is very near. Okay? All of those kinds of things. So, why would that be the focus of Jesus' message and mission? Why was the reign of God so important to him? And when he preached about the reign of God, what were the people who listened to him? What were they hearing? And what were they thinking? Does that all make sense? So there is quite a bit that goes into this simple little phrase, reign of God or kingdom of God. This concept was deeply rooted in Israel's history. And that's primarily what we're going to talk about today. All right? So, first point. The idea or the concept or the paradigm, reign of God, was rooted in three other ideas that were prevalent in Jewish thinking. The first one is the covenant. The second one is the eschaton. And the third one is apocalyptic, Jewish apocalyptic. Okay? Those three ideas taken together are the ideas that really shape the notion of the reign of God. So let's take those in order. First, the covenant. We're all pretty familiar with the notion of covenant. So, and it is a fundamental idea behind first century Judaism. They were people of the covenant. So what was the covenant? The covenant was the sacred agreement initially made with Abraham and brought to its highest point with Moses at Mount Sinai. The covenant was a sacred agreement. It was not a contract. That's a legal agreement. It was a covenant, a religious or sacred agreement between God and God's people. And in this agreement, both parties made promises. So, God made, convenient to remember this, God made 4 promises and the people made 4 promises. Okay? Easy to remember on a test, right? 4 and 4. So, that's the way I used to remember things. There's 3 of those and 6 of those. So, what were God's 4 promises in the covenant? First of all, He promised them His presence. He would be there. I will be there for you. The name Yahweh itself includes some kind of understanding of Jesus' of God's presence. I will be there. Second, He promised them land. It's referred to as, of course, the promised land. And that was the land that was Canaan that became Israel and Judah. Third, He promised them fertility in their crops. You won't starve to death. Okay? You will be able to make it. Famine was a real threat. If you had 2 or 3 years of famine in your country, it could wipe you out. Okay? And the fourth promise was fertility in their women. So they would continue. I will make you a great nation. There will be as many of you as there is sand on the seashore. Right? They would not go away. How many ancient peoples that we know we have at least some knowledge of didn't make it? Where are the Hyksos today? Where are the Edomites? Right? Gone. But the Jewish people are still hanging around. They're still here. It's still having an influence on world events. So those were the 4 promises made by God. The Jewish people also made 4 promises. First of all, that they would worship only Yahweh. Okay? They would not worship the false gods. Now, remember what I said last week, that this whole notion of covenant and the Mount Sinai experience is likely retrojected from the time of the exile back to the Exodus. Okay? So when they're talking about worship only Yahweh, that particular law, that promise, is spoken to the post-exilic Jewish people. Not to, it's in the book, in the story, it's addressed to the people of the wilderness. But it is, in actuality, addressed to the people of post-exilic Judea. Does that make sense? That's that retrojection thing that you have to keep in mind. When was something written? Why was it written? Who was it written for? Okay, so promise number 1, worship only Yahweh. Second, keep the law. Keep the law. And one of the reasons why many scholars believe that the idea of the Mount Sinai covenant was retrojected back into the book of Exodus is because of this. The law became an important identifier of one's Judaism only after the exile. It was part of what the priestly class did to redefine Judaism post-exile. And so in order to say, this is really important, what do? You put it into the Mount Sinai covenant, right? Does that make sense? I know it's your things are being moved around, but these the Old Testament books were written and then edited or redacted. Redacted means something different these days. It means putting magic marker on top of stuff. They didn't have magic markers, but it simply means edited for when we're talking about biblical texts. And so, worship only Yahweh. Keep the law, the Torah. Third, do not enter into any foreign alliances. Make no alliances with foreign nations. Why? What's that got to do with anything? Well, the belief was that if you entered into an alliance, let's say with the Egyptians, you were also entering into an alliance with their gods.
Yeah.
So if you worship only Yahweh, then you trust in Yahweh. When we look at Isaiah, we will see that Isaiah counseled both kings Ahaz and Hezekiah not to enter into foreign alliances because he should trust only Yahweh. Of course, they didn't listen to him. But anyway, be that as it may, that was the point. And then the fourth promise was to take care of the poor, the widows, and the orphans. The fourth promise was the promise of social justice. That God is a God of justice, and God's anavim, God's poor, were those who should be taken care of first. Now we know that the chosen people did not do a very good job of keeping their end of the deal, right? They were not very good at keeping the promises, but those were the promises that they made. Okay. So what's that got to do with the reign of God, you may ask? Well, the connection between the reign of God and the idea of covenant was based on 5 assumptions. Assumption number 1, God is just. God is fair. Okay? God believes in fairness. Assumption number 2, the land of Israel belongs to God. It doesn't belong to the Canaanites. It belongs to God, and therefore, and along with it, God wants the Israelites to have it. It is their promised land. Okay? Third, God promised the chosen people land as part of the covenant, and that is Israel. Okay? Fourth assumption. In the very beginning, the promised land, back in the glory days, in the heyday when they first got there, the promised land was distributed fairly or justly among all the tribes. That's not true, but that is the assumption. Okay, there was always this look back at the glory days of David, and when they first took over, and those were the good old days, and the land was distributed fairly at that time. And fifth, land is a gift that is to be shared by all. There was a very egalitarian ideal about land in ancient Israel. Very rarely enforced or followed, but believed in anyway. Okay, so if you look at the Torah, it reflects this focus on equality. So, for one thing, land is not supposed to be bought and sold. And if you look in the first book of Kings, chapter 21, in the transaction between Ahab and King Naboth, I really don't have to read this, you're all familiar with that. Maybe not? I wasn't either. This is chapter 21 of the first book of Kings. Later, the following events took place. Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard in Jezreel, beside the palace of King Ahab of Samaria. And Ahab said to Naboth, "Give me your vineyard, so that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is near my house. I will give you a better vineyard for it, or if it seems good to you, I will give you its value in money." But Naboth said to Ahab, "The Lord forbid that I should give you my ancestral inheritance." Okay? You just don't do that. That's not the way you deal with land. Again, these are ideals. These are ideals rather than realities. Second, the practice of loaning money or goods at interest, the practice of usury, was forbidden. So here we go to the book of Leviticus, chapter 25. This is what Leviticus said. Leviticus, okay, I'll just read it. "If any of your kin fall into difficulty and become dependent on you," well, that never happens, does it? "You shall support them." I think my kids read this verse. Didn't they? Sorry, guys. Sorry. "They shall live with you as though resident aliens." Okay. "Do not take interest in advance or otherwise make a profit from them, but fear your God. Let them live with you. You shall not lend them your money at interest taken in advance, or provide them food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan to be your God." Okay. Third point, if you demanded collateral for a loan, collateral was not to be excessive. So this is Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verse 6. "No one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge." Pledge is collateral. "For that would be taking a life in pledge. Look how important your millstone is. When you make a neighbor, oh, this is verse 10. When you make your neighbor a loan of any kind, you shall not go into the house to take the pledge, the collateral. You shall wait outside while the person to whom you are making the loan brings the pledge out to you. If the person is poor, you shall not sleep in the garment given you as the pledge. You shall give the pledge back by sunset, so that your neighbor may sleep in the cloak and bless you. And it will be to your credit before the Lord your God. Okay? So, no excessive collateral. Deuteronomy 15. Debts were supposed to be forgiven every 7 years. We're familiar with that, right? The Jubilee year? If a member of your community, whether a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you and works for you 6 years, in the 7th year you shall set that person free. And when you send a male slave out from you, a free person, you shall not send him out empty-handed. Provide liberally out of your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress, thus giving to him some of the bounty with which the Lord your God has blessed you. Reparations. If somebody works for you as a slave for 6 years, after in the 7th year, you let that person free, and you pay that person some of what you made off of him or her. Yes, sir. Yes, David.
I noticed something was missing. Land was to be divided equally. No comment about the quality, that it's fertile enough.
Yeah.
And considering that part of the world, there's no comment about water, either for crops or for human consumption.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of vagary here. So when they're talking about land, I presume that they mean arable land. Land that's able to either be farmed or ranched.
Oh, okay.
I would think. I mean, here, David Sullivan, you're next. Yeah, you get that. You get those rocks up there. And, yeah. Thank you. Good luck. Right?
How about that sandy patch at the other end of the building?
Yeah, the one that nobody else could grow anything on. It's all yours. Have at it. Yes.
When you speak of the tribes, what are the tribes?
Well, yeah, that's okay. I'm referring to the 12 tribes of Israel, which were in the story related to the 12 sons of Jacob or Israel.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Now, in reality, it was much, muddier than that. But that's the way the story goes. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
We were talking about Israel. The land itself went from the coastline to the Jordan, or did it go further than that?
I believe it went further east, the region they called the Transjordan. I believe so.
I thought at one time it was all the way to the Euphrates.
Yeah, that's right. The biblical kingdom of Israel, the promised land, did go all the way to the Euphrates. They never did control that much, but that's what's in the scripture as supposedly the promised land. Yeah, they never did. They at its height, it was not much different than this. It may have gone a little further south. It may have gone a little further east, but not that much. Yeah.
Mark, I'm a little confused about that. When Noah split the waters and they got through to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Was that not the land that they were going to have from then on?
No. The story has it that they wandered for 40 years
Oh yeah.
after they crossed,
Okay.
and they're wandering. At least the story has it that they wandered in what would be the not the Arabian Peninsula, but the Sinai Peninsula. The Sinai Peninsula.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And if you look at Leviticus chapter 25, right here. Yes. there was, every 50 years, there was a Jubilee year. And in the Jubilee year, according to the law, the land was to revert to its original owner. And you shall hallow the 50th year, and you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. You shall return, every one of you, to your property, and every one of you to your family. So that is an ideal of equality. Okay? As I said, it was normally not adhered to, but that was the ideal. Okay? So this idea of covenant, where I'm going with this in terms of the reign of God is that there is this belief that Israel belongs to the Jewish people. God promised it to them. And the Romans were usurping their right to govern themselves.
Yeah.
And really it was not, I said that mistakenly. It was not that they were going to govern themselves. It was that they would no longer be under the jurisdiction of the Romans. They would be under the jurisdiction of God. That was the point, that God, that's why they called it the reign of God, that God was the sovereign. Even during the days of the monarchy, during the days of those 400 years or so when there were the kings, the king was merely God's representative on earth. It was God who reigned over Judah and over Israel. Okay? That's kind of an important point. Okay.
Did they have to have somebody interpret what God wanted?
That's what they did. That's what the whole Bible is. It's an interpretation of God, what God wants.
So who did the interpretation?
Well, there's a whole bunch of people who did it. There were many, many different authors and many, many different redactors. And the understanding of what God wanted changed over time. Okay? But, by saying that, I don't mean to deny that it was all inspired. Well, what I am saying is that God didn't sit on anybody's shoulder and say, now write this down. Okay? That's not the way it worked. People were trying to understand what God wanted back in those days, just as we're trying to figure out what God wants today. The process, in my mind, hasn't changed at all. There was no bullhorn from heaven. I'm not. That's not the way I would interpret this. They were trying to figure it out just like we're trying to figure it out, right? And with somewhat the same success. It's a mystery. All right, so that's the reign of God. That is the covenant. The second main idea upon which the reign of God is built is the eschaton. So, I've discussed this before, but the eschaton, the end times, that's what the word literally means. It's a Greek word. It did not mean the end of the world, the destruction of the physical universe as we know it. That's not what eschaton meant then. In Catholic thinking, that's what it means now. The end of the world did not mean that back in those days. Rather, it meant that God was about to institute a new age. It referred to the end of an age. And in this context, it was the end of the age of Roman domination. Okay, that was the eschaton. It would be a new chapter in the history of the Jewish people. God would clean up, to use John Dominic Crossan's term, would clean up the world and make it the way it was supposed to be, with the Jews in charge of Israel. Okay? There was something terribly wrong with the status quo, with the current situation, and it was offensive to God. Why? Because, remember the assumption behind the covenant, God is a God of justice. And the Romans and the Seleucids and the Ptolemies and the Greeks and the Persians and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and all those people who had been in control of Israel, that all of that was considered an injustice. It was an offense against God, who is just and who promised this land to the Jews. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, there were two basic views of how this would happen. Okay? Both of them are contained in Scripture. Some said God would bring about this new age by using violence, through violent means. That God would exterminate Israel's enemies. And there would be a great battle, the great battle of Armageddon. Okay? So, this is from the book of the prophet Micah. This is a quote. Chapter 5. In anger and wrath I will execute vengeance on the nations that did not obey. Then my enemy will see, and shame will cover her who said to me, Where is the Lord your God? My eyes will see her downfall. Now she will be trodden down like the mire of the streets. The nations shall see and be ashamed of their might. They shall lay their hands on their mouths. Their ears shall be deaf. They shall lick dust like a snake, like the crawling things of the earth. They shall come trembling out of their fortresses. They shall turn in dread to the Lord our God, and they shall stand in fear of you. So that's one view of how God was going to get rid of the Romans. But it was not the only one. There was also a view that God would not use violence in order to usher in the new age. That God would convert Israel's enemies. God would convert the Romans in this case. And after that conversion, there would be a great banquet, the Messianic banquet. Okay? And it would be at Mount Zion. The battle would be at Armageddon. The meal, the feast, would be on Mount Zion. At that time, all the peoples of the earth would be converted, not to Judaism, but they would be converted to the God of justice. Okay? They would all believe in the God of justice. So this is also from Micah. The book of the prophet Micah contains both of these versions. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised up above the hills. People shall stream to it, and many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and shall arbitrate between strong nations far away. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall all sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. This vision is taken up in the 25th chapter of the prophet Isaiah. On this mountain, Mount Zion, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines, of rich food filled with marrow, of well-aged wines strained clear. And he will destroy on this mountain the shroud that is cast over all peoples, the sheet that is spread over the nations. He will swallow up death forever. Then the Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces, and the disgrace of his people he will take away from all the earth, for the Lord has spoken. Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
That all the peoples of the earth will recognize the God who is justice, and will all sit down and share a great meal together. I like that.
This is like Trump. You know, he says one thing and then he follows with another.
Well, and see, the prophet Micah reflects both of these views. How is God going to usher in this new age? Well, he's going to just beat the... Whoops, the video's on. He's going to beat the heck out of them. And the other one is, they will convert. He will convert them. And they'll all sit down and share a meal together.
Yeah.
Both of those views were operative in first century Israel. So, we have to ask the question, which one did the people of Israel mostly believe in? And which one did Jesus preach? Which one of those views did Jesus preach? Okay? So, there were, by the time of first century Israel, there were three different views of eschatology. Three different views of the eschaton, the end times. The first one is called apocalyptic eschatology, and I am indebted to John Dominic Crossan for these three versions of eschatology. I didn't think these up. Apocalyptic eschatology, do I have that in the note?
Yeah.
Okay. This was the view of people who were marginalized, like the Zealots. Okay? And they, of course, rejected the oppression and tyranny of the Romans. And their view was that God would counterattack, that God would come down from heaven and exterminate the Romans with violence. There would be a divine ethnic cleansing, if you will. Okay? And the result would be a perfectly just world. Except how does, and this was Jesus' reasoning, at least according to some, how could you establish a just world if you replaced one violent regime through violence? Okay? So I'm tipping it off. Jesus didn't buy this view. Okay? Remember, what is Jesus' view of God? God is a just God. Okay? God is a just God. Keep that in mind. Okay. The second view of eschatology, the second view of the eschaton was called ascetical. A-S-C-E-T-I-C-A-L. Asceticism, it has to do with self-denial, right? It's living an abstemious life. Self-denial. Denying oneself an abundance of food, clothing, possessions, sex, whatever. So this was the view of the Essene people. It too rejected the domination of the Romans, but it also rejected the view of the apocalyptic eschatologists. They did not believe that God would clean up the world through the use of violence. Rather, they said what should happen is that a community should withdraw from normal society, and they should live out the ideals of what God wants. In other words, a life of radical socialism. Or, no wait, my note says social radicalism. Alexandria, AOC was not in the scene, or is not in the scene. Okay, so they believed that they should withdraw into, and they did, withdrew into the desert and lived this life of social radicalism. So they lived a life, basically, they lived like a commune. So a homeless life, voluntary poverty, begging for their food, rejection of family through the practice of celibacy. And they believed that if enough people chose to live this way, then the reign of God would be established. They believed that if they modeled the type of behavior that God wanted, that the Romans would be converted. So they are of this view they're of this conversion mentality. Okay? The third view of eschatology is ethical eschatology. This is the view that Jesus and his followers took, at least according to the views of some. So, how would the Romans be defeated? How would the new age come about? It would come about through non-violent resistance. So if you want to look for a comparison, look at Dr. Martin Luther King's non-violent resistance in the Civil Rights Movement. Look at Gandhi's non-violent resistance during the movement for independence in India. In other words, nonviolent resistance refuses to cooperate or participate in the injustice and the systemic evil of the Romans. Okay? But it resisted without using violence. Okay? So the followers of ethical eschatology were more willing to die as martyrs than to give in to the temptation to violence in their view. Okay? One other thing that distinguishes ethical eschatology, according to the apocalyptic eschatologists and the ascetical eschatologists, God would come down and make things happen. According to ethical eschatology, and this is again the view of Jesus, God was waiting for His people to make it happen. Okay? So the responsibility for converting the Romans, the responsibility fell on the shoulders of the people. Does that make sense? Okay. And I think that's really important to understand, that God is not, okay, God, we're ready, make it happen. No, it's up to God's people to make justice overcome injustice. Okay? Okay, and who is going to be God's agent in making this happen? God was going to send His agent to make the end times happen. That agent was the Messiah. All right? And as is true in most things Jewish, there's more than one understanding of who the Messiah would be. Okay? So, some Jews believed that the Messiah would be a son of David. Apparently, the Synoptic Gospel writers believe that, right? They all have Jesus as, well, at least Matthew and Luke do, have Jesus as a son of David. So, listen to this from this is from the Psalms of Solomon, not in the Bible, which was written in the 1st century before Christ. God will raise up for them their king, the son of David, to smash the arrogance of sinners like a potter's jar, to shatter all their substance with an iron rod, to destroy the unlawful nations with the word of his mouth. He will judge peoples and nations in the wisdom of his righteousness. All shall be holy, and their king shall be the Lord Messiah. He will not rely on horse and rider and bow, nor will he collect gold and silver for war, nor will he build up hope in a multitude for a day of war. So, it may sound like this son of David vision makes the Messiah out to be a pacifist. But he's not a military Messiah. He destroys the Romans through his judgment, through the word of his mouth. Okay? And so the Messiah's ability to destroy enemies, Israel's enemies, by the word of his mouth means that he possesses the power of God. Because, remember, God in the first story of creation, a priestly story, creates how? By the word of his mouth. And so God's creative and destructive powers would be given to the Messiah to be able, by the word of his mouth, through the words of his judgment, to take down the Romans. That make sense? Okay. So that's the first one. The second one is not the son of David understanding, it is the son of God understanding. And there is an example of this found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is a quote from the Dead Sea Scrolls. He will be called Son of God, and they will call him Son of the Most High. Like sparks of a vision, so will their kingdom be. They will rule several years over the earth and crush everything. A people will crush another people, and a city another city, until the people of God arises and makes everyone rest from the sword. His kingdom will be an eternal kingdom, and all his paths in truth and uprightness. The earth will be in truth, and all will make peace. The sword will cease in the earth, and all the cities will pay him homage. He is a great God among the gods. He will make war with him. He will place the peoples in his hand and cast away everyone before him. His kingdom will be an eternal kingdom. So, you can see that there are alternative visions of who the Messiah would be. Some said he would be a warrior. Some said he would be a king like David. Some said he would use violence. Some said he would not. Some said he would be strictly a human being. Others said he would be a divine being. Okay? Remember the distinction I drew about divinity. Ontological, of course you remember this. Ontological divinity versus functional divinity. Well, so when I say that this Messiah would be divine, what I mean is that the Messiah would be able to do the things that God does. That's functional divinity. It's not saying that the Messiah would be God, would possess the same being of God. Now, the Nicene Creed took that step. The Nicene Creed took that step and said that not only did Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, not only was he functionally divine, not only could he do the things that God does, he was ontologically divine, consubstantial with the Father, one in being with the Father.
Yeah.
But that's later. That's 300 years after Jesus. Okay. A little side note here. Jesus was not the only man in first century Israel to claim to be the Messiah or to have his followers claim that he was the Messiah. Let me give you very quickly a list of about 8 or 9 other people who claimed to be Messiah. Yes. So in 4 BC, there was this poor shepherd whose name was Athronges. I looked that up yesterday. You know, if you go online, you can get a pronunciation. And the best pronunciation I heard was Athronges, not Athronges or anything like that. Okay, so this shepherd put a crown on his head and declared himself to be the king of the Jews. Good for him. Well, the Romans slaughtered him and his followers, okay? Number 2, a former slave of Herod named Simon of Perea. He led an unsuccessful rebellion against the Romans sometime between 4 and 15 BCE, before the time of Christ. Judas the Galilean. Well, Simon met the same fate as Athronges. Judas the Galilean led a protest against the census called by the Roman governor Quirinius around the year 6 CE. This guy, Judas the Galilean, is actually mentioned. His name is mentioned if you go to the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 5, verses 36 to 38. You'll hear him there. He was executed by the Romans also. Hear a pattern here? So, number 4, a prophet named Theudas had 400 disciples in around the mid-40s CE rather. He too is mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 5. He was captured by the Romans and beheaded. Another guy, a mysterious figure known as the Egyptian, raised an army of followers out in the desert, and he and almost all of his followers were massacred by the Romans. 6, a man named the Samaritan was crucified by Pontius Pilate, even though he never even raised an army. What did he do to tick off Pontius Pilate, I wonder, you know? Another guy, number 7, Menahem, who is perhaps a grandson of Judas the Galilean. He is believed to be the founder of the Sicarii. Have you ever heard of the Sicarii? The Sicarii were guys who were very good at assassination. So they would, be in a crowd of people, and they'd have their knife kind of hidden under their robe, and they would get right up to, I can't leave the thing here, and I won't ask anybody to come up, but they would get into a crowd, and the person who they wanted to assassinate, they'd get right up next to him, give him the old, jab, and then they would just kind of disappear back into the crowd and start saying, "Who would do that? Who did that? I can't believe it." You see, so they were very good at that. They were even able to assassinate people inside the temple precincts.
Wow.
They were quite good assassins. Okay?
And that's God being fair.
Well, according to them it was. Yeah, according to the Sicarii, because what they were doing was carrying out God's justice. I mean, see, there are some who say the way you get justice is by killing your enemies. Okay? Menahem was one of the leaders of the Jewish rebellion of 66 CE. So obviously he's one of those zealot peoples who believes that you should use violence to get rid of the Romans. It didn't work. Okay? He died in the rebellion. There's another Simon of Giora, who was a leader of one of the rebel groups during the rebellion. He died in the rebellion. And then there is, even in the second century, a guy by the name of Simon Bar Kokhba, who led a rebellion in the 130s. And he was successful for a while. And his followers believed that he was the Messiah. Well, he didn't make it either. He was, his rebellion was put down and he was executed. So you see a pattern here. Somebody says, I'm the Messiah. They gather a group of followers, and the Romans get wind of it, and they execute him. And usually they execute the followers as well, which of course begs the question that I don't have time to get into. Why didn't they kill the apostles?
Yeah.
When they killed Jesus, why didn't they execute the apostles as well? And I read a book within the last year that explains why they didn't. But I don't remember the name of the book, and I don't remember the reason why. So one of these days, I'll find the book, and I'll say, "Look, I found it." Okay.
Weren't these people you mentioned here zealots?
Some of them were, and some of them weren't. The real zealot party only emerged at the time of the rebellion. Okay, and they only lasted about a year before they were all, done away with. Okay, but there were, like, the Gospels mention Simon of the Zealot party and things like that. But you have to keep in mind that these are written after after the rebellion. Okay, so that might have been retrojected back into it, or they might just have been one of those people who believed that it would take an act of violence to get rid of the Romans.
That they were in the right, they were doing what was called of them?
Yeah, they believed that. They believed that they were called by God to usher in the eschaton. See, Jesus was not the only one who believed, or if Jesus believed that, I for one, kind of believe that he did understand himself to be the Messiah. At least his followers did, right? That's what they wrote. Okay. So, that's number 2. Number 3, the kingdom of God concept. It was tied to the covenant, it was tied to the eschaton, and it was also tied to the notion of Jewish apocalypticism. So what the heck is that? So apocalyptic in general has to do with a revelation, some kind of vision from God. So what was the vision of Jewish apocalyptic? The vision was that God was about to usher in this new age. God was about to defeat the Romans, and it was going to happen very soon. Okay? Apocalyptic tends to be the frame of mind of people who have been under the domination of others for a long time. And the Jewish people had been under the domination of foreign powers for the better part of 600 years. Imagine that. Imagine if the United States had been under the governance of England since 1419. And, we had no say in the passing of laws. It was all done by Parliament and Theresa May and Boris Johnson and all of that. That eye roll was just purely random. It was purely random. And so, we would be upset. We would want that, we would want that to stop. Our founding fathers wanted that system to stop, right? No taxation without representation. They wanted to govern themselves.
That's right.
Kind of the same principle here.
Yeah.
Okay. So, let me sum this up. These 3 ideas, covenant, eschaton, apocalyptic, shaped the mindset of the Jews of the first century, and it shaped the mindset of Jesus and his followers. The covenant had to do with the idea of the land. The land belongs to God. And God has promised it to his chosen people. This land doesn't belong to the Romans. This land belongs to us. Eschaton. God will usher in a new age by getting the Romans out, and this would be accomplished through his Messiah. apocalyptic. God was going to reestablish his reign in Israel very soon, really soon, right now. Okay? We're sick of this domination by foreign powers. God's going to make this happen real soon. Can you see how those three ideas would be shaping the thinking of first century Israel, and why the message of Jesus would have been, received well, at least by some of the Jews. His message of nonviolence would not have been received well. The Zealots would have said, "Nah, we got to go, kick some of that thing." But Jesus' followers did not believe that. Jesus' followers believed in the conversion model. And how would they convert the Romans? And think about it. So what does that say? Remember the conversion model. The Romans would be converted through the example of God's people. And then there would be the great banquet. What was the great banquet? That was the Eucharist. Okay, that was the celebration of the eschaton, of the new age, the messianic banquet which everyone could share. And all those gathered around the table would be those who were converted to the idea that God is fair, that God is just. So that's a little bit of an aside, but okay, so that's what they're thinking. And me going off on my aside made me lose my primary train of thought. What was I saying? Oh yes. So Jesus believed that God would accomplish the great cleanup of the Romans through nonviolence. And how would he do it? How would they convert them? They would convert them through 4 different practices or attitudes. First one was through healing. So it would teach the Romans the proper way to use power. Healing would teach the Romans the correct way to use power. How do you use power? To dominate people? No. Use power to heal them. Second, Jesus and his followers shared meals. They shared meals with anybody who wanted to come. The feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. Okay? What does that say? That this practice of meals open to everyone is a sign of unity. Were the Romans into unity? Not at all. They were into division. Okay? Third, wandering. So, by wandering, what are Jesus and his followers saying? They are saying that they place their trust not in their land, not in their possessions. The land is to be shared by all, so it doesn't have to be divided up between everybody, amongst everybody. We place our trust not in our land or our possessions, we place our trust entirely in God. And if Jesus and his followers modeled that behavior, then the Romans would see it and say, "Oh, so that's how we're supposed to do it." And fourth, Jesus' attitude and the attitude of his followers was one of radical equality. And we see that all over the place in the Gospels, where Jesus hangs out, I mentioned this last time, with all kinds of ne'er-do-wells. From prostitutes and tax collectors to Samaritans and Romans and women and lepers and all kinds of people that you're not supposed to hang out with. Okay? Does that kind of shape it a little bit?
No, it's very contrary. In one breath they're saying, let's open this up to everybody, let's all have a good time, let's do all this. Oh, don't talk to Samaritans, pass the guy on the road because he's not Jewish.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's contrary to what
Yes.
the idea is.
And it's the first and only time that people did not live up to their religious ideals. Right?
This may be far-fetched, but is that one of the reasons you have as you have mentioned, how important land is, that the Palestinians and the Jews are still fighting?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because of land.
Absolutely. Ever since the time of Menachem Begin in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, Begin's party represented that wing of the Israelis who believed that the ancient boundaries of the kingdom of Israel belonged to the Jewish people. Okay, and Netanyahu is, a follower of that same kind of thinking. Yes, there is this belief, so you build barriers around it. You go into territory that's really, to be shared with others, to be shared with Palestinians. You go in there and you build these villages and these communes.
Yeah.
And you tell the Palestinians to get out. This thinking is behind that. Later. Okay, so does that make sense?
Well, yes, I was over there and I saw this happening. And so I read all this other stuff, or people come up to me and say different things, and I go, have you been over there?
Yeah.
That's the first thing I say. Because when you see it in person, it's totally different.
It's very different. But there is religious and political thinking behind it.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. But I can tell you this. Where I was in Jerusalem, and that I saw a family, two families living side by side. One was Jewish, one was Palestinian. They helped each other.
Oh, yeah.
The Palestinian father was building just doing the kitchen cabinets for the Jewish family until the government got involved and decided to take the highway by the Palestinian family's house, and they had no garden or anything left. I saw this.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
I was
it's
like, what?
It's a huge source of controversy, not only among Israelis, but among American Jews as well. I mean, there's
I know, it's
there's
such a
disagreement about the rightness or wrongness of what is happening in Israel today.
Yeah. Yeah, I just saw many things, and I won't go into that, but that made me wonder about
Yeah. Some of this is biblically rooted. Some of this thinking
I
is
see.
biblically rooted.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you. All right. So there were several different ways in which the Jewish people resisted the Romans. Okay, I've alluded to some of them. Now let me just call them out. So some people believed in violent resistance. So there were like bandits who roamed the countryside, okay, who engaged in guerrilla warfare against the Romans, okay? Of course, the Jews, at least those who were their supporters, didn't consider them to be bandits or thugs. They were freedom fighters, right? Another group I've already mentioned, the Sicarii. Okay, let me read you. Let's see. Where is my? Oh yeah. All right. So this is the way the Jewish historian Josephus describes the Sicarii. This is from his book. A different type of bandits sprang up in Jerusalem, the so-called Sicarii, who murdered men in broad daylight in the heart of the city. Especially during the festivals, they would mingle with the crowd, carrying short daggers concealed under their clothing with which they stabbed their enemies. Then, when they fell, the murderers would join in the cries of indignation and, through this plausible behavior, avoided discovery. Pretty clever.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see, what else did I say about the Sicarii? They also committed attacks in villages, which they raided for plunder and set on fire in order to create fear among Jews who went along with or collaborated with Roman rule. Okay. Nice guys. So that was one. Then there's violent resistance. There is actual taking up of arms, militant violence. I've already, referenced some of the people who engaged in militant violence, including the Jewish Rebellion of '66. There was then symbolic, nonviolent action. There would, for example, from time to time be groups of followers who would journey from the countryside to Jerusalem. expecting, and they would just walk around the perimeter of Jerusalem, expecting its walls to fall down, like the walls of Jericho, right? They expected that God would do the same thing, all right? But then my note says, because these groups were unarmed, they were routinely slaughtered. The Romans didn't brook, resistance very well. Another example of symbolic non-violent action would be Jesus' quote cleansing of the temple. It was a symbolic action. The symbolism behind his turning over the tables and all that, and making a whip out of the cords and all that, was as a protest against the system. The system supported by the temple priesthood that impoverished the poor of Israel. Okay, because as I said last week, the temple was, among other things, the central bank of Judea, the central bank of Israel. And people, that's where you would exchange money. There wasn't a whole lot of money in their system, but what there was, that's where it would be taken care of. Fourth, there were non-violent communities. Some people, like the Essenes, created communities they believed would initiate the apocalyptic event. That's like the Essenes. So they practiced radical justice to the poor, the widows, and the orphans in imitation of God's justice. And they believed that by doing this, God would be motivated to initiate the new age. Okay. Then there was nonviolent resistance. And I said that Jesus' followers were believers in nonviolent resistance, but there were others as well. And I think these examples are really kind of interesting. In the year 26 CE, when Pilate became the prefect of Judea, he demanded or commanded that Roman standards, Roman signs, be carried into Jerusalem bearing the image of Caesar. That's not a way to make friends with the Jews, okay? In response, hundreds of Jews, hundreds of the leading citizens of Jerusalem staged a sit-in at Pilate's house in Caesarea. How about that? Pilate had the protesters surrounded, and he threatened to have them all killed. So this is what they did. They responded by flinging themselves on the ground and stretching out their necks, saying, "Go ahead," preferring death to having images of Caesar in their land. And what did Pilate do? He backed down. Pilate backed down. Nonviolent resistance sometimes does work. In the year 40 CE, the Emperor Caligula, whose marbles were not, some of the marbles fell out of his bag early in his life, okay? He required all the Jews all over the empire to worship him as a god. When the Jews protested, as you would expect they would, he doubled down. He ordered a statue of himself with his head on top of the body of Zeus to be constructed within the temple. Wow! So tens of thousands protested to the Roman governor of Syria, and they vowed not to plant their crops if Caligula carried out his orders. And they said they would rather die as martyrs than see the temple desecrated. Well, as it turns out, the statue was never built because shortly thereafter, Caligula was assassinated. And so the temple never happened, the statue was never built. But once again, nonviolent resistance, it had a history. Jesus was not the first or the only person to practice nonviolent resistance. Okay. So where does Jesus fit in all of this mishmash of stuff? I've kind of talked about it already, but first of all, he believed in nonviolent resistance. Second, he radicalized the golden rule. Okay? So he took the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and he took it to the max. So he said, turn the other cheek. Give to others without expecting any return. love your enemies. If the soldier asks you to carry his cloak for a mile, carry it too. Okay? Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In other words, be better than the people who are oppressing you. Be better than them. All right?
It's a bit of work.
And this is consistent with Jesus' belief that A, God was just, and B, God was waiting on his people to make the eschaton happen. He was not going to appear out of the clouds. He was waiting for his people to practice the justice that would be the cause of the conversion of the Romans. You see where he was coming from? Okay. All right, so now let's a couple other little things here before we go. I want to just point out a couple of other important people during the time of Jesus. I want to talk about the rebellion of 66, and then I think I'll have time, I'm sure I will, to cite some of the sources which mentioned Jesus that are outside the Bible. Okay, so where was Jesus is brought up not just in the Gospels and in the New Testament, but in other places as well. So, backing up, first person I want to talk about, Pontius Pilate. Fairly handsome-looking guy for being such a awful person, right? So he was appointed by the Romans to rule Judea between the years 26 and 36 CE. So that's one of the barometers by which you can gauge when Jesus died. It was somewhere between those years. Okay? Somewhere between 26 and 36. His family was actually from around the southern peninsula of Italy.
Oh, he was Jewish?
Yes.
Yeah, he's Jewish.
So he was described as cruel, cold-hearted, and rigid. He once brought a set of gilded Roman shields dedicated to Tiberius into the temple. That's blasphemy, okay? He crucified thousands of Jews. I've said this before. So many that the people of Jerusalem actually lodged a formal complaint against him to Rome. And the Roman Senate actually said, hey, cool it a little bit with the crucifixion, okay? There were times when he would crucify 100 or hundreds of people at the same time.
Wow.
Okay? Not a nice guy.
No.
So, second one. So when you hear the Passion story next year, and this is only in John, Jesus is brought before Annas and Caiaphas. Behold, Joseph Caiaphas. He was a wealthy guy. He was appointed high priest in the year 18 CE because of the influence of his father-in-law, Annas. He served as high priest for 18 years, and he was deposed the same year as Pilate. Okay, they kind of governed as a team. And together, Caiaphas and Pilate were pretty much able to keep law and order in Israel. But the way that they did it, crucifixion, law and order, okay? Very tight law and order. So, okay, I think that's, do I have anybody else?
Isn't he the one that gave the 30 pieces of silver to Judas, or to Judas?
To Judas.
Yeah. This is,
Was it the high priest or was it the Sanhedrin? Help me, Ken. Was it the high
They were
priest?
saying,
Same guy.
I thought, okay.
The Sanhedrin. Okay.
Said he
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
I thought that's what it said.
Okay. Oh yeah, there's Flores. I'll get to Flores in just a minute. So after Pilate, after 36 CE, this kind of apocalyptic, revolutionary passion continued in Israel. Okay? I mentioned Theudas and Jacob and Simon. They all tried to start rebellions without success. After Pilate, there was a succession of weak governors, including this guy, Florus, who didn't help matters, okay, because they were not able to keep law and order the way that Pilate had. So that leads to the rebellion of 66, the year 66, which is one of the earliest watershed moments which helped to distinguish Christianity, which up to that time had been strictly a sect of Judaism, helped to distinguish it from other sects of Judaism. Okay, this is one of those turning points. It's not an absolute turning point like some people will say, that after the rebellion, Christianity went this way and Judaism went that way. That's not true. It's more like they went a little bit like this. Okay, the final separation would take almost 400 years. So the rebellion of 66 was precipitated by this guy, Florus, the governor. He broke into the treasury in Jerusalem and stole 100,000 denarii. And his claim was that it was unpaid taxes. Okay? This led to rioting, and Florus put down these riots by killing people in the streets. Then the Romans sent a new governor, and I think I had him.
Oh.
Yes, there he is. Agrippa II. Well, you want his head or his name? Well, let's have his name there. Then they send Agrippa, a new governor, who is a Jew, to restore calm. He gets up on the rooftop of the palace and he says, "Hey, please stop it. Stop doing what you're doing." That fails. He flees the city, and so now the Jews take over control of Jerusalem. All right. The Romans, at first, in response to this, they send a few troops to try to put it down. It doesn't work. All right. Finally, Rome sent a general by the name of Vespasian and his son Titus to bring law and order back to Israel. They take back all of Israel except Jerusalem. When they get to Jerusalem, Vespasian is called back to Rome to become the emperor. And so he says to Titus, "Finish this job," okay? Titus does that. There is... Kind of looks like Dad, doesn't he? A little bit. So Titus comes in. He builds a siege wall, and eventually, he takes over Jerusalem. He kills as many people of Jerusalem as he possibly can, including the Essenes. He destroys the temple. He tells those who still live in Israel to get out. And he actually renames Jerusalem. He calls it Aelia Capitolina. The reason for that is because he wants to destroy the memory of Israel from human history. That's how complete and utter he saw his task. And, as we know, the Jews were pretty much gone from Israel until the 1940s. Okay?
Yeah.
They did a pretty good job of it. Okay? Now, for those of you who've ever been to Rome, if you have ever seen in the Roman ruins, this thing right here, not very good resolution to it, that's the Arch of Titus.
Yeah.
That arch was built in appreciation for Titus's having destroyed Jerusalem and for having...
By who? Who appreciated it?
Daddy, Vespasian.
Oh.
Daddy built it for him. Nice to have a dad as the emperor, right?
Yeah.
It's good to be the king.
Is Titus the one who took the Masada?
Yes,
Oh, Masada.
Titus is the one who took Masada. Although, I've watched something on Channel 9. Channel 9 is a great history destroyer, isn't it? So according to the story of Masada, what was it, 700 people or whatever, they decided to jump off the hill rather than face, they decided to be martyrs. But there are not bodies at the bottom of the hill. So, but
I thought they were starved.
they did starve them out, but then when they finally, broke in, the story has it that they committed suicide rather than face the Romans. And it's one of those things that may not be factual, but it's still true. Okay? That they, so it may be the stuff of legend.
They jump off a cliff and there was no bones at the bottom.
Yeah, the archaeologists have found no record that, of all these people committing suicide. But, not the first or the last time that's ever happened. I mean, let's look at the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre. How many people died in the Boston Massacre, Mr. Sullivan?
One-handed.
5. Yeah, it was like 5. But it was called the Boston Massacre. Why? In order to fire up the people of the colonies.
I believe that Israel presently, when they have new recruits come in to join the force,
Yeah.
that they pledge their loyalty to Israel on Masada.
Ooh. Wow. That's pretty powerful. Yeah. Okay. Good. So, when and where was Jesus mentioned in non-biblical literature? I found this a few weeks ago, and I thought, well, it's time, to point out that Jesus was talked about in a few places in non-biblical literature. Why is that important? Well, because it substantiates that there actually was a Jesus of Nazareth. The man himself is not a myth. Okay? He's a flesh and blood human being. So the first guy is Josephus, the Jewish historian. In his book called The Antiquities of the Jews, he writes about a Jewish high priest named Ananus, which is very close to Annas, who illegally condemned, quote, James, the brother of Jesus, the one they call Messiah, which, is a phrase that's just fraught with meaning, because, wait a minute, James, the brother of Jesus? Well, that's how he's referred to in the gospel. Bart Ehrman, one of my favorite scholars, says, when you ask Catholics, did Jesus have brothers and sisters, they say, of course not. If you ask Protestants whether Jesus had brothers and sisters, they say, of course he did. It's in the Bible. Okay? So, anyway, Josephus refers to James, the brother of Jesus, the one they call Messiah. He condemned him to death by stoning for breaking the law. Okay? Second reference, the Roman senator and historian by the name of Tacitus. Do I have them?
Yes.
Do I have their picture? I most certainly do. There's Josephus. There is Tacitus. Okay? He mentions Jesus and the Jesus movement in reference to the fire that occurred in Rome in 64 CE. This is what he says. And I think that there's a few liberties being taken with this translation, as you'll see in 1 second. Therefore, to scotch the rumor. Would Tacitus have written a phrase like scotching a rumor? Anyway, that's the translation that I found. Therefore, to scotch the rumor, Nero substituted as culprits and punished with the utmost refinements of cruelty a class of men loathed for their vices, whom the crowd styled Christians. Christus, the founder of the name, had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Tiberius by sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilate, and a pernicious superstition was checked for the moment, only to break out once more, not merely in Judea, the home of the disease, but in the capital itself, where all things horrible or shameful in the world collect and find a vogue. So when he refers to Christianity as a superstition, what he means is any kind of religion that went against the prevailing Roman religion was considered a superstition. Okay? And if I'm not mistaken, some of the people like Irenaeus when they're talking about the Gnostics and some of the other Christian sects that they didn't agree with, they called them superstitions as well. Okay, next guy. Pliny the Younger, which of course means there was a Pliny the Elder as well. Okay, in one of his many letters to the Emperor Trajan, he asks for advice on how to deal with Christians who are brought before him on trial. Okay, this is a quote from Pliny. "It is my custom, sir, to refer to you in all cases where I do not feel sure, for who can better direct my doubts or inform my ignorance? I have never been present at any legal examination of the Christians, and I do not know, therefore, what are the usual penalties passed upon them, or the limits of those penalties, or how searching the inquiry should be made. I have hesitated a great deal in considering whether any distinctions should be drawn according to the ages of the accused, whether the weak should be punished as severely as the more robust, whether if they renounce their faith they should be pardoned, or whether the man who has once been a Christian should gain nothing by recanting, whether the name itself, even though otherwise innocent of crime, should be punished, or only the crimes that gather round it." So there is Pliny. One other interesting thing about Pliny, at least in my warped mind, I think it's interesting. Pliny the Younger actually was a witness to and wrote about the eruption of Mount Vesuvius that buried the city of Pompeii.
Yeah.
And there's an exhibit on Pompeii at the Science Center in St. Louis right now. It's really good.
Wonderful, yeah.
So,
Well, they actually found this letter, this letter actually has been found and interpreted.
this one?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
You know, just from his writing there, it doesn't seem like the Romans were that bad.
As time went on, they treated, it was sporadic. They treated the Christians well or not well, depending on who it was and where they were and what the times were. You're right. The legends about the numbers of martyrs and all that kind of stuff is inflated. The best number that I've seen is that between the time of Jesus and the time of Constantine, there were about 2,500 martyrs. Now that's not, that's not great, but that's not a whole, wasn't this wholesale martyrdom. I remember as a kid hearing about all the martyrs and the tombs under Rome, and they had to hide out and in secret for their lives and all that kind of stuff. That wasn't the case. If you laid low, if you just kind of laid low, you could survive as a Christian. And then by the time you get to the 3rd century, Christians are becoming much more normalized and are buying large estates, these latifundia they're called, these large estates. And so by the time of Constantine, it's like, oh shoot, they're already here, we're not going to wipe them all out, so let's just accept them within the empire.
That letter sounded like this guy was really searching for justice.
Yeah, he's trying to treat them fairly. So, if their only crime is being a Christian, should I punish them or not? Or should I only punish them if they've done something else, jaywalking or whatever else they did? Right? And one more. Suetonius, a Roman historian who lived between the years 70 and 130 CE. He wrote a biography of the Emperor Claudius, which was one of, I think, 12 emperors that he wrote about in his series, Lives of the Caesars. He says this: "Since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christus," that's Christ, "he expelled them from Rome." What's interesting about that is he considers the Christians to be Jews, right? I'll read it again. "Since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christus," okay, "he expelled them from Rome." So Suetonius considers the Christians to be Jews, which was the case.
Yeah.
And then in his biography of Nero, he says this about the Christians, and again in the aftermath of the Great Fire. Punishment was inflicted on the Christians, a class of men given to a new and mischievous superstition. Okay, so there are some mentions of Jesus outside the Bible. Any questions or final comments?
Yeah, what if Nero burned down Rome
Yeah.
because he wanted to get rid of the Christians?
No, he burnt down a large section of Rome because he wanted to build a monument. He basically wanted to build a monument to himself. And then he blamed the Christians. He blamed the Christians for it. Yeah. Hey, thank you once again very much. And